The theory of leadership that I'm going to describe in this video is the path goal theory of leadership. This is a well-known theory in the leadership literature, and it's been around since the early 70s. Martin Evans proposed this theory in 1970. Robert House then refined those ideas. He developed those ideas further over the next several years. And he is the person who is mostly credited with the path goal theory. The basic premise of the path goal theory is that the leader's primary responsibility is to motivate the followers to accomplish their tasks. And the leader does that by removing obstacles that prevent followers from accomplishing tasks. So let me re-emphasize this. The leader's primary responsibility is seen to be motivating the followers by removing obstacles out of their way that prevent them from accomplishing tasks. In other words, the assumption is that followers will generally be motivated to work towards accomplishing tasks because that gives a sense of accomplishment, fulfillment. Plus, accomplishing those tasks could also lead to certain rewards. So followers will be motivated, but followers don't stay motivated when obstacles come in their way. That's what demotivates followers. That is the reason the leader's job is to remove those obstacles away. And obstacles could be of any kind. They could be organizational obstacles. They could be psychological obstacles. Whatever the nature of those obstacles, the leader's responsibility is to remove those obstacles. And that's how the follower will stay motivated and accomplish those tasks. That is the basic premise of the path goal theory. The next point that I would like to emphasize is that the path goal theory is another contingency theory of leadership. In the last video, I described the situational theory of leadership, which was a contingency theory of leadership. Same is the case with the path goal theory. Contingency theories argue that there is no one best way of leading. What would work great in one situation may not work in another situation. So, path goal theory also takes the same approach. In the path goal theory, there are 4 different kinds of leadership behaviors. And what is suggested is that you modify your leadership behavior depending on the situation, because none of those behaviors will work across the board. So you modify those behaviors or you change your leadership style based on 2 factors: the needs of the followers and the setting in which the follower is working. Those are the 2 broad category of factors based on which you modify your leadership style. Now, quickly, let me compare this with the situational theory of leadership, because there are some major differences as well. In the situational theory of leadership, the leader modified his style based on the developmental levels of the followers. And how did we define the developmental levels? We defined them based on their competency and commitment, or in other words, their skill and motivation. In other words, you modified your style of leading based on how skilled or how motivated the followers were. But in the path goal theory, motivation is the goal. That is the objective. So you are not tweaking your style based on the motivational levels of the followers. Rather, your goal as the leader is to motivate your followers. That's one major difference. Here's a pictorial depiction of the path goal theory. As I have discussed before, subordinates or your followers, they are automatically motivated to work towards certain goals. The reason they get demotivated or the reason they do not persist in working towards accomplishing those goals is when obstacles come in their way. So the leader's job is to remove those obstacles. The leader does that by defining the goals. So one of the obstacles could be that there is not much clarity about what needs to be accomplished. So the ambiguity about the goal itself could be an obstacle. So the leader then defines the goal. For instance, creating a SMART goal, something very specific, measurable, attainable, and so on and so forth, time bound. Another thing that the leader could do would be clarifying the path, because not all paths to accomplishing the goal may be valid paths. For instance, it would be wrong to cheat and accomplish the goal. That wouldn't be considered right. You will not accept that as a leader. So, clarifying the path. Removing obstacles is something that we have already discussed. The fourth point is providing support. Providing support, psychological support, being available for your followers. That would then help the followers stay motivated to work towards accomplishing those goals. As I mentioned before, the primary goal of the leader is supposed to be motivating the followers, follower motivation. The idea behind that is that if followers are motivated, if they are working hard, then they will attain goals, goal achievement, and they will also be satisfied. So those are the two most common ways that we measure leadership effectiveness. So all leadership behaviors, these are 4 leadership behaviors that are described in the path goal theory. All these leadership behaviors are ultimately geared towards enhancing follower motivation. Now we will go over each of those leadership behaviors in a little bit detail. So the first one is directive leadership behaviors, nothing but task-oriented leadership behaviors focused on accomplishing tasks. So you set goals for your followers, you set standards for your followers, you assign tasks, you set deadlines for completing those tasks, and so on and so forth. The next one is supportive leadership behaviors, nothing but relationship-oriented leadership behaviors. This is about caring for the followers. It's being about compassionate towards their needs, understanding their needs. It's being friendly, it's being nice to them, it's being approachable to them. So these are some examples of supportive leadership behaviors. So this is a new category of leadership behaviors that wasn't discussed in the behavioral approach or situational approach. In the participative leadership behaviors, the leader is consulting the follower. The leader is seeking the followers' opinions, ideas about what goals to pursue, for instance, or how to get something done. So the leader is involving the follower in the decision-making process. The last category is called the achievement-oriented leadership behaviors. This is about challenging the followers, challenging them hard. It's about pushing them to their limits. It's about not being satisfied with just accomplishing goals. When they accomplish those goals, push them even further. So it's about constantly challenging them. So it's about continuous improvement. Setting really high standards of excellence is what we are referring to when we are referring to achievement-oriented leadership behaviors. And along with that, of course, you express confidence in the follower that, hey, you can achieve this. These are the 4 categories of leadership behaviors. Going back to the diagram that I had before, we have the 4 leadership behaviors that impact follower motivation. That is the goal of all leadership behaviors, to enhance follower motivation. If followers are motivated, they will accomplish tasks, they will be appropriately rewarded, and consequently they will be satisfied. So that is how we measure leadership effectiveness anyway. So in path goal theory, you engage in these 4 leadership behaviors. But remember, this is a contingency theory of leadership. In other words, it is not recommended that you are always engaging in these 4 leadership behaviors. That is impractical. So what is recommended is that you use certain behaviors with certain types of followers. So which leadership behavior you should be using would depend upon certain follower characteristics, certain follower factors. We will go through these factors in detail. And also certain environmental characteristics. Some of these leadership behaviors will work better in certain environments, but not in other environments. So that is what we are talking about here. The first follower characteristic is need for affiliation. Some people have a high need for affiliation. Some others have low need for affiliation. Those who have high need for affiliation, they have a strong need to belong to a group. This is the love and belongingness need. How should you lead people who have high need for affiliation? What is recommended is that the leader engages in supportive leadership behaviors with such followers. Why? Because these followers have a need to connect with others. And the leader, by engaging in these relationship oriented behaviors, will be building that relationship with these followers. So that followers' need for connecting with others, the followers' need to have a psychological connection, emotional connection with others will get fulfilled if the leader engages in supportive leadership behaviors. The second point is preference for structure. People vary in their need for structure. Some people want everything to be structured. Everything should be clearly defined. If it isn't, it frustrates them. They get agitated. On the other hand, there are those people who thrive in chaos. Ambiguity doesn't bother them. So there is a preference for structure. How should you lead people who have a high preference for structure? Which of those four leadership behaviors will be effective here? It is directive leadership, because directive leadership provides that structure. In fact, in the original behavioral approach to leadership at Ohio State, they called the task leadership behaviors initiating structure. So task leadership behaviors or directive leadership behaviors help give the followers certain amount of structure. When the leader is saying, this is what you do, this is exactly how you do, when the leader is setting standards, that and timelines, everything that provides structure to the followers. That is the reason directive leadership style is recommended for those who have high need for structure. The next factor is desire for control or locus of control. There are two broad types of people in this world. Some have a stronger internal locus of control. These people believe that whatever happens in their life, success or failure, they have a strong control over that. So it could be hard work or lack thereof that caused them to succeed or fail. That is internal locus of control. Then on the other hand, we have people who have more of an external locus of control. These people believe that, again, whatever that is happening in their life, successes and failures, are caused by or largely influenced by outside factors outside them. It could be luck, it could be boss, it could be the economy, it could be somebody being fair or unfair, but that's what we mean by external locus of control. So people make different kinds of attributions. How should leaders lead people who have high internal locus of control? What is recommended is that you engage in participative leadership. Because people who have internal locus of control, they want to be involved. They want to be part of the process. So when you engage in participative leadership behavior, you then make them more motivated. You could also engage in achievement-oriented leadership behaviors. That could be another option, because these people tend to take a lot of self-responsibility, so you can push them harder. So achievement-oriented leadership behaviors could also be valid for people with high internal locus of control. How should you be leading those who have external locus of control? The idea is that you engage in directive leadership behavior, because they don't like to take responsibility. They need to be given directions. So you as the leader have to then give them a lot of directions in order for things to get done. So that is why directive leadership is recommended for those who have external locus of control. The last category is perception of one's own ability to get a job done, to complete a specific task. Nothing but self-efficacy. If you have high self-efficacy, you have high confidence in your ability, in your skills, that you can get a job done. How should you be leading people who have high self-efficacy? What is recommended is you reduce the extent of directive leadership behaviors with such followers. Why? Because they don't need your direction. They already have high confidence that they can get things done. So directive leadership behaviors become redundant. In fact, if you continue to engage in directive leadership behaviors, that will appear like micromanaging, and it could actually make them frustrated. They could get demotivated if you continue to engage in too much of directive leadership behaviors for people who have high self-efficacy. Finally, some environmental characteristics, some task characteristics. Your followers may be working on different tasks at different points of time. They may be in different team environments. You should not be leading your followers the exact same way across these different environments. How should you be leading them? When your follower is working on a task that is very unclear, very ambiguous, it is not very precise, how should you be leading? What is recommended is you engage in directive leadership behaviors or high task leadership behaviors. You direct the follower, you give them proper directions that helps provide some structure to the follower. If the task was very clear, straightforward, you didn't have to engage in directive leadership behavior. In those situations, you will reduce the extent of directive leadership behaviors. Certain jobs can be highly stressful. Other jobs, not so much. When the jobs tend to be highly repetitive and boring kinds of jobs, or when the jobs are highly stressful, how should you be leading? What is recommended is you engage in a lot of supportive leadership behaviors or more relationship-oriented behaviors. By engaging in such behaviors, you alleviate the stress of the followers. You meet their emotional needs, which then helps them sustain their motivation even during these difficult circumstances. So you engage in a lot of supportive behavior when the followers are engaged in stressful jobs. Sometimes the organization that you're working in may be having weak formal authority. So your job then becomes setting rules, work requirements, everything, making things clear. So engaging in directive kinds of leadership. And finally, the teams that your followers are part of may have high cohesiveness or may have low cohesiveness. In other words, there may be a strong bond between them or they may have weak bond. When they do not have that strong bond, your job becomes to provide those emotional needs that get fulfilled through the strong bond. In other words, you engage in more supportive kinds of leadership behaviors. So here's a summary of the different leadership styles recommended in different situations. When employees have high role ambiguity, they don't know what they're supposed to be doing. When they have low abilities, and when they have external locus of control. During these three situations, you engage in more directive leadership behaviors. And why? Because when tasks are ambiguous, they need that direction. When they don't have ability, again, they need that direction. They have to be told exactly how to be done, what to be done. When they have external locus of control, they don't take initiative. So you have to provide direction. When tasks tend to be boring and repetitive, and when they are stressful during these situations, you have to provide more supportive leadership style. Also, when they have high need for affiliation, which we have discussed. When employees have high abilities, they are highly able people. When the decision that you are taking is relevant to them, it is not about some unrelated issue, but relevant to the lives of those employees. And when employees have internal locus of control. During these three situations, you engage in more participative leadership style. You have to involve them in the decision-making process. When they have high abilities, you involving them in the decision-making process is going to help you get more creative, better ideas to solve the problems. So that's great. When the decision is relevant to them, you not involving them would potentially make them dissatisfied. And finally, when they have internal locus of control, they like to influence what happens to them in their lives. So you again need to involve them in the decision-making process. Finally, the achievement-oriented leadership style would be very helpful when your employees have high abilities. Because they have high abilities, you can push them even more compared to the regular folks. And when they have high achievement motivation, in other words, they have a strong drive to succeed. So because they have a high, strong drive to succeed, you can push them even more. So that is the achievement-oriented leadership. Now that we have gone through the tenets of the path goal theory, let's quickly discuss how we should go about applying the path goal theory. What should be the first step? What should be the second step? And so on and so forth. The first step should be figuring out the situational characteristics, specifically figuring out the subordinate characteristics or follower characteristics and the environmental or trait characteristics. The leader should have good clarity about the followers' personality traits, the followers' needs. The leader should have good clarity about the nature of the task that the follower is engaged in. The leader should have good clarity about the kind of environment in which the follower is operating in. Once the leader has good clarity about these situational factors, then second step would be modifying one's style to match up with those situational factors. If this matching is done correctly, then you will be very effective a leader. Then you will be successful in motivating your followers. That is the basic idea of the path goal theory. Now, this is a complex theory for sure. There is a even more complex version that was proposed, I believe, in the late 90s, 96 probably, where there are 8 different leadership behaviors that are discussed and many more subordinate and environmental factors. So one of the weaknesses of this theory is that it's a little too complex. But the good news is that despite its complexity, it has a fair amount of empirical support in its favor. Not a whole lot, but a fair amount of empirical support, which is very good. So it's a well-researched theory and provides some great insights about how you should be leading in different situations. Plus, it is grounded in the theory of motivation, which is another major plus for the path goal theory. Keeping these things in mind, I would recommend that you learn this theory and try to incorporate it as much as possible.